Welcome to the Com Analytics channel. This is Boris Zinghausen with you. Today is August 11th. There are a lot of important news stories. In this episode, for the first time, Ukrainian Armed Forces drones have struck 2,000 kilometers deep into Russia, setting another oil refinery and a major factory ablaze. Let's watch the video. Putin is taking revenge on Aliyev. He's hitting Azerbaijani property with drones. And the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Fiko, called Ukraine grass beneath the feet of elephants. Meanwhile, the US is preparing sanctions against India and China. Who will blink first? The Kremlin dreams of a peace show with Trump in Alaska, but secretly they have no intention of returning anything to Ukraine at all. Is this the end of the war or the beginning of its most brutal phase? We'll talk about this and much more in today's episode. There's a lot of interesting stuff ahead. If this is your first time on this channel, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. So let's get into it. So on the night of August 11th, Ukraine launched drone strikes on several regions of Russia at once, including Moscow. A powerful strike hit the Arzamas Plandine instrument building plant. This is one of the key enterprises of the Russian military-industrial complex. The local authorities mumbled something about debris falling in the industrial zone. And we have a great video, so now you can see for yourself the power of this piece of debris. This isn't just a piece of debris, it's some kind of magical artifact. Take a look at this video. Oh. Wow. Honestly, I've never seen a piece of debris like this before. This enterprise that was struck is a leading company in Russia's military-industrial complex, producing equipment for the aviation and space industries as part of the state defense order. But that's not all. For the first time, Ukrainian drones attacked the Komi Republic. That's almost 2,000 kilometers from the border with Ukraine. Another oil refinery was hit. So basically, for the first time, drones reached Ukhta. This refinery is located in the city of Ukta. Naturally, they shut down mobile internet there. Naturally, they suspended airport operations. And this refinery, Lukoil Ukta oil refinery, was struck by drones from the main intelligence directorate, GUR, of the Ministry of Defense. I mean, 2,000 kilometers, isn't that something? So they hit a unit for processing gas and condensate. Basically, this plant supplied fuel naturally to the Russian army. In general, of course, Ukta is a city of oil workers, a city of gas workers. It was built by Gulag prisoners. But when I study the information, look at the maps to see where everything is, it's hard for me to comment on what I found there. Listen, one of the main attractions of Ukhta is a 33-meter-tall, glowing red profile of Lenin, breaking all records for the size of his images. At night, this profile glows bright red. A 33-meter-tall profile of Lenin. It's also standing in some park there, surrounded by some fir trees. Well, what kind of horror is this anyway? By the way, there are plenty of disgruntled residents in the local chats. There was no warning, no siren, no idea where the shelters are or what condition they're in. And of course, for the first time during the whole war, hello, we are Ukrainian drones. They paid them a visit. So they fought themselves into a situation where in the Komi Republic, 2,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, people are looking for shelter and waiting for the sirens to be turned on. And now an extremely important piece of news. In my opinion, it could significantly impact the geopolitical landscape and potential new alliances in general. The presidents of Ukraine and Azerbaijan condemned the airstrikes carried out by Russia on facilities belonging to the company SOCAR. Let me remind you, this is an Azerbaijani company, and the strikes targeted an oil depot and a gas compressor station that transports Azerbaijani gas to Ukraine. So what did Putin do? He struck with absolute precision at the coordinates of the SOCAR company's oil depot in Ukraine and at the gas compressor station that pumps Azerbaijani gas to Ukraine. He targeted those sites deliberately. And in Baku's statement, the strikes on these facilities were described as deliberate. So, just so you understand, this is Putin's way of getting back at Aliyev for no longer standing on ceremony with him lately over incidents where Putin tried to show off his strength, to act aggressively, and Aliyev responded to him in kind. In short, Putin found a way to take revenge on Azerbaijan. This isn't really about energy as such. The strike on SOCAR and the compressor station is about a policy of intimidation. In other words, Moscow is trying to undermine this new energy alliance that has formed Kiev and Baku, and to punish Aliyev for his independence and stance, so far unsuccessfully. A bit later, you'll understand why Baku made a statement that, frankly, no one could have imagined even a year or 6 months ago. That's Putin for you, you see? Cowardly, petty, vindictive. He decided to strike at SOCAR on Ukrainian territory. And the Russians did the same thing recently when they struck at Polish factories located on Ukrainian territory in order to pressure Poland into refusing to help Ukraine. At that time, the strikes targeted a factory owned by one of the richest Poles, which is located here on the territory of Ukraine, Russia, Ukraine, in the hope that this very wealthy Pole, using his connections and influence, would sway the political leadership of Poland. Well, it seems that the effect turned out to be somewhat the opposite. By the way, Putin can always be answered in kind. Always. Always. What does he do after all? He destroys Azerbaijani property on foreign soil, destroys Polish property on foreign soil. It's clear that Russia is at war with Ukraine, so here Putin can strike, and that's why he found a way to take revenge. I think they will target, or are already targeting, maybe we just don't know, property belonging to other Western companies. In my opinion, this is far from the first case. So how can one retaliate against Putin in kind? That means, well, obviously for now, no one dares to strike on Russian territory, at least for now, I emphasize, except for Ukraine. But here's the solution. But we'll talk about that a bit later. Putin's private military companies can be hit, especially on the African continent. Just chip in for some properly equipped private military companies and chase these guys, the African Corps, Wagner, wherever they are, Mali, Burkina Faso, the Central African Republic, Libya, Sudan. Some very interesting units took Wagner apart. You remember that, right? And then, for some reason, the local rebels thanked Ukraine for completely wiping out the Wagner fighters there. And now, the second piece of news. Now, there will be a series of just 3 news items about how Putin has outplayed everyone again. Azerbaijan is allocating $2 million in humanitarian aid to Ukraine. Aliyev signed this order. Well, this is for the restoration of the energy system, which was damaged due to attacks by the Russian Federation. So they'll fix the compressor station too. They'll fix everything. Naturally, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Azerbaijan and everyone who supports Ukraine. You know, it seems to me that the more the withered alpha male Kabayev tries to show his strength and greatness, the more repulsion he provokes, the more people just run from him as if he were the plague. By the way, I have a completely innovative solution to propose, and we've just come to it now. You probably know that there's an option to donate to the armed forces of Ukraine and sign a shell or a missile, depending on the donation amount, to send a direct message to the Russians. The same approach could be used for those foreign companies whose property was damaged by Russians on Ukrainian territory. This is to show Putin that there will always be a response for this, and maybe an even much stronger one. For example, if Putin strikes at the production facilities of the richest man in Poland, bring your weapons here to Ukraine, bring your missiles, your drones. We'll hit back at Russia so hard that it will make their heads spin. So they struck at SOCAR's infrastructure, right? No problem, we'd be happy to use your missiles. We'll destroy a few gas metering stations in Russia in response. No problem at all. And here's the third piece of news, which absolutely fits into the logic of this narrative. The more Putin tries to show off his greatness, the more he tries to demonstrate his power, the worse it gets for him. Azerbaijan has threatened to start supplying weapons to Ukraine because of these strikes on SOCAR facilities in the Odessa region. And they might lift the arms embargo because of what Putin is doing. As I've already said, no one is really afraid of this Kremlin tough guy. So, in fact, this is a direct threat to Putin. If you strike our facilities again, we'll start supplying weapons to Ukraine. Well, this fascist riffraff only knows how to make threats, as you know. And now, as they say, he's in a tough spot. The guys won't understand if, after such threats, Putin really stops hitting SOCAR. So, the tentacles of the cunning Botox Medusa have once again stretched out in all directions. That's how it is. If you don't strike, you're weak. If you do, you'll get even more problems. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, because watching calm analysis reduces the chances that you'll lose your mind at the worst possible moment. It lowers that risk. Our segment, Jackal Express. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico, commenting on the upcoming meeting between Putin and Trump, stated that Ukraine will suffer from this meeting no matter what. But it's important to understand how he said it. I quote, "Do you remember the old African saying that I love to repeat so much?" says Fico. It goes, "When elephants fight or make love, the grass always suffers. No matter how the elephants' talks go on August 15th, the grass will suffer. In this case, Ukraine." You see what kind of crap I am, right? Fico also called for an immediate ceasefire agreement and urged that other Western countries not be allowed to intervene in any potential ceasefire deal. What will happen in the coming days won't be rosy, Fico added. Well, it certainly won't be for him. The Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs responded to Fico's statement, "We warn against using unfriendly folkloric allegories and against attempts to boost your party's political ratings through such statements. This is recklessness that insults the memory of the fallen, the suffering of millions of Ukrainian families, and the sacrifice of those who are fighting for freedom." Absolutely the right response. In general, under Sybiga, the new Minister of Foreign Affairs, the reaction to such attacks has become quite swift and sharp, which, by the way, earns him a big plus from us. By the way, in West Africa, there's another piece of wisdom. I looked it up, especially for Fiko. It goes like this: a mouth that talks too much will sooner or later invite trouble into the house. Or, to put it in our own words, don't run your mouth and you won't get smacked. That's basically the idea, because Fico has already divided up Ukraine and is suggesting we just accept it. In my opinion, even Russian propaganda channels don't pick up the Kremlin's agenda as quickly as this guy does. He's basically going through withdrawal without gas, and he wants to end the war as soon as possible at any cost, of course, in the interests of the Russian Federation, so that gas will once again fill the storage facilities and the pockets of those involved in these shady, murky schemes. You know who this Fico guy reminds me of? Do you remember the cartoon The Jungle Book, based on Kipling? There was a jackal in it named Tabaki. Remember him? He used to screech in this nasty little voice, "Akela missed, Akela missed." Well, that's the point. That's the point. When the Kremlin pensioner stumbles and they start to bring him down, Fico will be the first to kick his former patron. I can guarantee you that. And as for the idea that Ukraine is just grass and the elephants are fighting somewhere out there, well, it turns out the grass is tough enough to give one of the elephants a beating. Ukraine and Ukrainians have shown the whole world that an enemy many times stronger can be stopped and, excuse my French, thoroughly beaten. Even when no one believed it was possible. Remember the first months? Well, let's send them some helmets or something, maybe some first aid kits. Well, then, just to be sure. And it turned out there was this kind of grass that grows perfectly on the graves of hundreds of thousands of Russian occupiers. Let me remind you, friends, who we owe it to that all this filth, all this biotrash trying to bite off another piece of Ukrainian land is being held back. In other words, it's our valiant warriors. And that's why I always remind you that we have ongoing fundraisers, and right now we're raising funds for FPV drones on fiber optics for the 101st Brigade. They are holding the line, including at Chasiv Yar. I've already told you about this. It's one of the hottest spots right now. Waves of them, an incredible number of ghouls are coming wave after wave in these meat assaults. And that's why drones on fiber optics are exactly what's needed. They'll simply be destroyed, and they're being destroyed now, but it'll be even more effective. I'll show you this video once again.
Wishing you good health. We are servicemen of the Unmanned Systems Battalion of the 101st Separate Brigade for the protection of the General Staff, named after Colonel General Hennady Vorobyov. We are addressing Tizenhausen, Boris.
Those who defend our country, those who protect us need our help. Yes, that's how it is sometimes. The front is not just the front lines, but also the support from the rear. So let's help out. We're making good progress with the fundraiser, so let's help our soldiers. The link to the fundraiser is in the description of this video and also in the comments. There's private, there's mono, and there's PayPal for those who want to help from abroad. I always sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, thank everyone who helps, both on my own behalf and on behalf of our soldiers. They always record videos with their support. If you're not watching on my channel, here's a QR code. You can use it to go directly to the fundraising page. And Donald Trump will not refuse to impose sanctions against consumers of Russian oil if negotiations fail. This was stated by Senator Lindsey Graham, who is probably one of Ukraine's main supporters in Congress. According to Senator Graham, Putin, well, it's not that he despises sanctions, but he treats them in such a way. At least he acts like they don't cause him any pain. But Graham believes that Putin, or rather his economy, might not be able to withstand it if the US targets buyers of Russian oil. And I quote, "Our entire goal is to break him, Putin, and his clients, that is, India, China, Brazil. This is the new strategy. Trump is ready to do everything possible to punish Putin's buyers if we can't put an end to this war." Well, that's absolutely right. So, well, Graham says, on the one hand, Graham always says the right things. He pushes this topic. He talks about sanctions. Both Graham and Kellogg are two very pro-Ukrainian officials, and we are extremely grateful to them for that. But as for Russia, for Putin, who isn't afraid of sanctions, it seems to me, or maybe it's just that Iskander stopped finding it funny a long time ago. Putin himself has said 100 times that sanctions strengthen Russia. If they strengthen Russia, cement it, then yes, that means we need more sanctions. Or maybe he's lying to the Russians again, what do you think? And as for the budget deficit, it's literally growing by the day. Every day this hole gets bigger, and now the deficit is already about 5 trillion. Just imagine, that's with a forecast of 3.8 by the end of the year. It's already 5 now. So everything there is just wonderful. Iskander will find it very funny, especially if new sanctions are imposed. And the meeting between Putin and Trump in Alaska will bring peace. This was stated by Kirill Dmitriev, a representative of the Russian president. A very dangerous figure. I've always said you should never underestimate the enemy. This Dmitriev is a truly very dangerous and influential figure. He's like a slippery eel, adeptly slipping into various upper echelons and layers, let's say, of American society, where there's significant politics, where there's substantial big business. One moment he's with the prominent Elon Musk, then with different powerful politicians, then with esteemed senators. In other words, a very dangerous figure. And, you know, he's kind of a demon, Putin's negotiation demon. He'll pull a deal out of this pocket, something else out of that one, and some pleasant projects out of another. That's why he's a dangerous figure. And so he stated that neoconservatives and other warmongers won't be smiling on August 15th, 2025. A dialogue between Putin and Trump will bring hope, peace, and global security. So first they brought war, devastation, and death, and now they're going to bring peace. See how that works? By the way, Russian television is running all sorts of flattering stories about how Russia and the US are settling everything in Alaska and how there's no place for Europe at the negotiating table. And of course the same goes for Ukraine. Like, it's us and the US here, Russia and the US, who will discuss the new world order. Let's put it this way. Today's Russia is already a complete vassal of China. Total dependence. Absolutely. Obviously, the second and most important point is that they'll try to fool Trump to get him to somehow influence Ukraine and bargain for a bigger piece of land for Putin. And this piece of land with its destroyed cities will really be like a suitcase without a handle for Russia, meaning they won't restore it and there will never be a normal life there. Look at what happened to the occupied Donbass. After 11 years, water is supplied once every 3 days and in some places once every 4 days. What have you done to a once prosperous region? Just look at Donetsk before the Russian occupation, and then look at Donetsk after the devastating occupation. How could anyone possibly destroy and utterly ruin a vibrant city like that? You really have to make a concerted effort, try very, very hard to achieve such a level of destruction. So, for those who called for the Russian world and are now on some of the occupied border territories, and by the way, this also applies to Russian territories like Kursk and Belgorod regions where there are strikes, forget about anything ever being restored for you. That's it. The best period of your life was before Putin started the war. After that, there won't be money for anything, let alone for rebuilding. Pipelines and sewage systems will fall into disrepair. Every week in Russia, some building or apartment entrance collapses. Just today, again, I've even lost count, I thought it was the same news, but it turns out they're different stories. Everything is falling apart, everything is decaying, all the money has gone to the war. After the war, it will be even worse. No one will restore anything. That is, if before the war at least, well, they would steal half and do a half-hearted repair of a dam, now they'll steal everything because only half or a third of the funds will be allocated. There will be no repairs, dams will burst and break, buildings and entrances will collapse, and so on. This is Putin's world. As for whether or not Ukraine joins NATO, this demand, I think right now, we shouldn't even be thinking about it. And I think many people have started to rethink the project itself and the very architecture of security within the alliance, especially at the moment when suddenly the key player in the alliance can't guarantee your security. Suddenly it's like, oh, you're not paying? Goodbye? In general, after this war, I think the NATO project in its current form will be shut down. So, if Europe wants guaranteed security, it needs to create, let's say, a kind of European NATO in which the strongest link will naturally be Ukraine. And today, the Washington Post has published a very interesting and telling article. Russia has no intention of returning the occupied territories or of making peace. In other words, the Washington Post writes that Moscow is only ready for a temporary ceasefire, not for any territorial concessions. Besides, territorial concessions mean giving up something of your own. What does it mean to make territorial concessions of someone else's Ukrainian land? Well, whatever. According to insiders, the Kremlin believes it is politically easier to continue the war until Ukraine completely collapses than to make peace. They are clinging to the idea of a temporary truce so that elections can be held in Ukraine. Well, we've already talked about this with you. For Putin, the ideal scenario would be, first, not to get sanctioned, second, to have the opportunity to keep fighting, and also to eliminate the threat of missile and drone strikes on Russian territory, especially now that Ukrainian ballistic missiles are on the way. So that would be the perfect option for him. As for cannon fodder for assaults for these offensive actions, I think he'll be able to gather enough. In the worst case, they'll bring people in from North Korea for money, but then the question is how quickly they'll die. Not exactly a great option, but you can gather cannon fodder for assaults and military actions, but you can't do the same for oil refineries and military factories. That's why I recently spoke with my American colleagues, and many in the US understand that this is exactly what Putin wants. So don't strike the oil refineries, especially since today drones are already flying 2,000 kilometers to Ukhta. Well, something needs to be done here, especially since Europe might still provide some missiles, some kind of rockets. No. So an air ceasefire, meaning not to strike 30 kilometers from the front line, that's the ideal scenario for Putin. And many in the US understand this. That's actually why articles like this appear in the Washington Post. And I'm grateful to my acquaintances, many from both the Republicans and the Democrats, who periodically deliver the right messages to the places where they need to be heard. And by the way, to help my European and American viewers understand even better, I want to remind you that for a couple of days now, an English language channel has been launched where you can watch all my videos in English without automatic dubbing, and you can also share it with your friends. The link to it is provided in the description of this video. It will appear right after the donation details. Send it to your English-speaking friends, let them get informed and know the truth. And as for you, my friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. And let's support the fundraiser for our soldiers. They really need it right now. Let me remind you, the donation details are in the description. Wishing us all a peaceful day and glory to Ukraine.